Good morning. Thanks, Greg, for the introduction and that helpful overview about where we are finding ourselves these days in relation to climate. So yeah, I'm Erin Upton. I currently work as a senior social scientist with the American Farmland Trust, which is a national nonprofit. And we work to preserve farmland, do conservation work, but mainly to support small and medium-sized farmers across the country, including in the Pacific Northwest. So I spend most of my time listening to farmers, not talking to giant groups, but of really varied backgrounds and learning from their lived experience with an aim to help support them as they really encounter and engage with these challenges around climate and the impacts of our changing climate. So prior to this position, I did my own research. I've probably talked to a few of you in the room as I was doing that. That was really about the intersection of water, climate change, and I looked at this in the Willamette Valley here, our home landscape for some of us. I know some of us are from further afield, but my home landscape. And then in other regions, some regions in California, and further afield in South Africa and in Australia, and specifically spending a lot of time looking at the wine region in Tasmania. So I'm here today to talk about water resilience and what we may want to consider as we live and farm and make wine in a region with increasing challenges around water as a result of climate change. Okay, this is the interactive part. I know you all have a cell phone. So we're going to do a really quick live survey. If you can take out your phone, use your camera function. If you hold it up to this QR code, you should get that yellow square with a link. And I'm going to leave this QR code up just for a minute to let you all do this. You're going to see a survey. It's a live survey. It's going to just be 2 simple questions. And it's going to give us a little bit of a sense of who's in the room. It's completely anonymous. It will not be linked to you at all. But I'm going to wait until I see everyone's cameras back down on their laps. Okay, here is in real time responses. So, do the property or properties that you farm or make wine in have adequate access to water? Ooh, we're in good shape, yes. So far, 72 yes. A few no, a few I don't know. Does anyone go to the next page? Oh, there we go. Nice. I had a feeling that we might get a response like this in this room. So, do you think about or plan for the future of water for your operations? A lot of folks are saying yes. A few no's. Cool, thanks. That was a fun experiment for me. I've always wanted to try this technology in a report or in a presentation. Okay, thank you. Perfect. Any surprises there? I was warned it would be a quiet room. It's okay. All right, well, I like to start with a definition. So the Center for Climate Resilience and Energy defines climate resilience as the ability to prepare for, recover from, and adapt to the impacts of a changing climate. So Greg was talking about adaptation and how that can really vary, but it's not just one thing. And resilience can really manifest in a number of ways, depending on lots of factors in your operations. So I'll dig into this theme in my talk, and we will have time for questions and, as I prefer, discussion at the end. So why do I care about water in wine regions? So I'll just give you a really brief background about what sparked my curiosity around these themes. So a number of years ago, before I knew anything about this subject, I was the operations manager at a winery in the Willamette Valley, just down the road here. And this business included a production facility, vineyards, and a tasting room. And we had 8 wells on the property, but none of them were very productive. And we frequently had shortages of water, particularly for use in the cellar. So the owner at the time also had become really focused on putting in a big green lawn on the property with an irrigation system. So turns out he was also trucking water from a different vineyard site or different operations to this property. So about once a week, a big truck would come and fill up the supply there. And I regularly had to coordinate with the cellar crew as to when I could turn off the irrigation system for the lawn in order for them to have adequate supply to do what I thought we were there to do, which was make wine. So it took a lot of time, it took a lot of energy, a lot of coordination. And little did I know at the time that it's also not permissible by Oregon water law to truck water around like that. So I kind of started to wonder about the bigger picture of water in our region, as many of us think of it. You know, we're a rainy, wet, Exhibit A out this window region. And, but we also know that we have dry summers, we experience drought. But I was just getting kind of curious, what's the bigger picture of water in our region, especially as the industry was growing, visitors and tourism was increasing, people were moving to the area. And then I also started to notice headlines like this in the media. So I wanted to understand kind of a larger context of the future for our region, which I mentioned my home landscape. I grew up in McMinnville. And as in addition was kind of curious, what does this mean in the context of a changing climate? So what does this mean for people? What does this mean for the environment and our community, as these challenges were probably going to increase? So that's what kind of set me on my path. So I invite you during this talk to think deeply about why we should care about water in this industry. And even though we might not be experiencing kind of the dire straits that some of our neighboring regions or other regions around the globe are experiencing with even more extreme weather events and other regions that might be hotter and drier, we do know that climate change will create issues with water availability. We'll get more into this in a little bit, which is the ability to access the water when we need it, as well as clean, adequate water supplies. You know, they're going to be critical for good social, economic, and ecological outcomes for our region going forward. And we'll dig into each of these a little bit more, but kind of the big picture when we think about water in wine, what theme will come up a lot, the water availability piece, and that we as an industry exist in a larger regional context with other demands on our resources. Economic considerations, of course, are really extremely important. So water quality, water permitting, infrastructure costs around water systems in operations, and just the cost of water use can add up. Of course, there's the environmental impacts to consider, what it means for our operations and their impacts on water quality. And in our regions, as we want to maintain adequate, clean drinking water supplies, and of course, the really important adequate and clean habitat. And then I'm glad that Greg mentioned mitigation. We're in pretty, serious situation, but we also need to do all we can to continue to slow the impact of our actions. So often higher water use comes with higher energy use, which results in increased CO2 emissions in many cases. So you're probably pretty familiar with how you're vulnerable to climate change. But I'll just go through a few things that you might have already experienced or may potentially experience going forward. So higher temperature trends, heat waves, we've already had that, drought, frost, hail, summer rain or unpredictable seasonal weather, more disease pressures from warmer winters, increased disease pressure from potentially new pests, new ranges for pests, experienced the wildfire, which in addition to smoke taint, there can be vineyard or structure damage. And then in our operations, so the importance for human health, extreme heat and smoke, the impact on the workforce working out in those conditions. Compression of vintage. So something that used to take 2 months is going to all be happening in 4 weeks. And what does that mean for your planning, for your operations, for the materials, the staff? And then again, costs. And then often we think about farming, we think irrigation when we think water. And of course, I speak to a lot of people, and probably a lot of people in this room, they're like, we don't irrigate. But there is, of course, a need for water in all aspects of the industry. So of course, we use a lot of water in the cellar. And then some people do still irrigate, and depending on your region, or potentially if you're establishing a vineyard. And then with potential changes in weather and patterns going forward, it might be a tool to help maintain your operations going forward. And then of course spraying, dealing with wastewater treatment on site often, and then just use. So agritourism, hospitality, flushing a lot of toilets, washing a lot of glasses, and then as I mentioned before, that kind of regional growth around tourism, or potentially more people moving to the regions, being drawn by the wine industry. All right, I'm going to give you a little snapshot of some water use in the industry that we have. So this is really recent data about water use in the cellar. Again, snapshot, so it's kind of a small sample size, but it's some of you in the room here. This is all anonymous, don't worry. But 27 live members who voluntarily self-report their use of water in their operations. This one caveat of this, and Chris definitely correct me if I get this wrong, but people are reporting slightly different things. So some people it's just their water use in the cellar. Others it's their entire operation with the tasting rooms or the landscape. So we're not looking at apples to apples, but this is just to get a snapshot. So the average is 8.6 gallons of water per case of wine. And some people reported quite a bit higher. So I think, let's see, the highest report was 69 gallons of water per case, and the lowest was 1.3. So the 8.6 is on average. And then a snapshot in the vineyard water use. Now it's difficult to have the resources to collect this data frequently. And so this is a little bit older data. It's from 2015, but again, it can kind of give us a sense. And this was a research project funded by LIVE, partnering with the Oregon Wine Board, looking at vineyards across the state of Oregon. So about 20,500 acres of vineyards. We're using about 15.5 million gallons of water annually. So that's about 30 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And then this research shows approximately 50% of the water was irrigation. 25% of those vineyards that reported were using irrigation. And 50% of the water use was from spraying. Any surprises out there by these numbers? And then because I'm a social scientist, I'm always really curious about the human part and people's attitudes and perceptions. So I just thought I'd give you a couple of perspectives from your peers from some interviews I did in the Willamette Valley a few years back. So I think we know that our aquifers here are not that deep or that rich, and I think that water availability is definitely an issue. And as availability becomes an issue, quality becomes an issue. Overwhelmingly, the number one issue with respect to site selection is access to water. Water is extremely important just for running the winery. So there's a number of approaches for adapting to climate change challenges. And some of them might have negative impacts on our water supplies, but positive impacts on your operation. And others might be beneficial. So they could include increasing water use. So you might irrigate more. You might spray more for pests. You might use water for frost or heat mitigation. And you might be seeking sources to be able to continue your operations in your cellar and hospitality operations. Or you could go the other way. Maybe you're going to reduce water dependency, which would get my vote. So changes in maybe how you're farming, changes in how you're running your cellar. And I think give you some examples, and would love to hear examples of what you are all up to too in some future slides. So, and again, the mitigation. So That's still really important. And then we'll get into a little bit about how to, or the institutional change work and how that might be something you might want to engage with or are already engaged with. So what influences decision-making about water? This is my social science hat. So a number of factors can influence both your individual decision-making or collective decision-making about water in wine regions. And I like to think of them in kind of these three categories. So here they're shown in these overlapping circles because they all influence each other. They're all interconnected in systems. So one category is our environment, and in this case, as it relates to water. Our watersheds, our hydrologic system, as we all know, does not adhere to some arbitrary property line or land ownership boundary, but we're within a watershed system, which brings up considerations about water quality, water quantity, and how these are connected to the changing climate. Another category is our institutions, so legislation, policy. It's at a range of governance scales, so county, state, federal, international treaties, treaties with tribes, et cetera. And these are considerations about who's allowed access to water, how you can access water, and really who's at the table making these decisions. And then the third category, social systems. So this could include culture, the attitudes, the values, maybe attitudes about irrigation, maybe attitudes or values around climate change. I work nationally in a lot of different agricultural regions. There's still quite a big range of perspectives about climate change, which always surprises me being in my Pacific Northwest bubble, but it's not the case for all regions. And so recognizing that decision-making is being impacted by people's beliefs, including political leanings, and of course, economic considerations as well. So this might be a refresher for a lot of you, but we really do need to understand kind of the source of our fresh water, mainly our surface water and groundwater. And in many areas in our region, this water is coming from melting snowpack that accumulates in our mountain ranges. So as it melts throughout the spring and the summer, it's recharging that surface water, that groundwater. And climate change is really projected to result in some profound changes on this system. And we'll get into that a little bit more later, but in an interview with a staffer at the Oregon Water Resources Department, they really expressed their concern about water availability in the future and the need to start thinking about this resource now. So the problem is that we're running out of fresh water. People need to be thinking, not in panic mode, but of the big picture and planning for the future. Oh, looks like I forgot to advance my slide for that little piece. All right. So, let's see, am I getting this right? Yes. So what is our climate future? I think Greg gave us a good snapshot, but I'll just zoom in a little bit from that report, that latest report from OSU just this winter. I think it was January 2025, the Climate Change Research Institute. And we've seen these predictions before, but they continue to be present. So snowfall is projected to decrease, and still precipitation in the winter, but a lot more rain and rain on snow events. The precipitation has been below average for 18 of the last 24 water years. Warmer, more prone to drought. So the snow is melting sooner. It's going through the hydrologic system sooner out to the ocean, through the rivers out to the ocean, versus that was our water storage to be able to release throughout the year and have more adequate water supplies in the summer and early fall. So we can expect that those are going to decrease. And then, of course, the changes in temperature rising. So when we consider the potential for less water availability, we also need to consider that the wine industry is operating in this context of this larger region. So there are many demands on water resources, including other types of agriculture, industry. I mean, we've probably all seen some headlines about server farms. They use a lot of water. Hydropower, recreation, of course, drinking water, extremely important, so municipal uses, and then water as habitat for fish and other species. And we can also consider the role of institutions in water access. And there are a number of regulatory bodies at various levels that can influence how we make decisions and behaviors about water. And this is by far not the complete comprehensive list, but just a snapshot. Okay, so this also might be a refresher for a few of you, but I think it's important to understand kind of the institutional context that we're operating in. I am not an expert in Oregon water law, but I can probably put you in touch with one if you really want to go deeper. But I'm just going to give you the basics here. So in the West, the water belongs to us, the people, but the state regulates access and use using the doctrine of prior appropriation, which is sometimes called first in time, first in right. So this determines who gets access to water and who can use it. Water rights were given to those who claimed them first, and they were the senior water rights holders. And everyone who comes after them is considered a junior water rights holder. So in times of scarcity, those senior holders get to keep all of the water. Anyone who came after them might have to restrict or stop using it. And I'm sure many of you have seen conflicts play out over water rights and water use in the news recently and for a number of years in Western states as water scarcity and demand conflict. And we do have to acknowledge that this state regulatory system does not take into account the original people who were actually here first and the sovereign tribal nations and indigenous communities, which I hope we'll hear more about during David's talk. So a water law professional who consults frequently with those in the wine industry in this region pointed out that the reality of new water rights are just really not easy to come by since most are already allocated. So a lot of what people are doing is applying for new groundwater rights. Surface water is generally not available for new uses during the irrigation season. And if they're wanting to do a winery, a tasting room, they're getting groundwater rights. So if you obtain a water right out there, there are definitely limitations about the quantity you can use, the specific location you're allowed to take it from and use it on. Hence my former employer trucking it all around was a big no-no. And then specifically what you're using it for. So water rights in Oregon and in the West are often pretty appurtenant to land, which means generally that they're tied to the land where the water's used. When the land is transferred, bought, sold, et cetera, water rights are typically usually transferred as well. Some people have land without water rights, and they try to obtain a water right from the state. Recently, there's been a lot of policy action. There's a nonprofit called the Friends of Family Farmers who've been doing some advocacy work around this because there's been some big things coming up with domestic wells. And the policy is you are not allowed to use your domestic well to water anything, irrigate anything for food production, commercial. It hasn't really been enforced ever until right now. And so now the water masters from the Oregon Water Resources Department are starting to really come after the small farmers who are using it. So anyway, I'm not advocating for or against any of this. I'm just letting you know this is happening and that this organization has been producing some pretty interesting, they have a YouTube channel, some pretty interesting stuff to kind of help understand how Oregon water law is impacting people. So for the last decade, it has been difficult to obtain a new water right, surface or ground. They say the wait times could be up to 2 years for your application processing, and the cost starts at about $2,500, and most applications are denied. So it's talk to your water master before applying for any new rights, and they'll be able to advise you. But another option that is currently exempt from water rights is rainwater capture from roofs and storage on your property. And some operations here and some of you here probably have already invested in that infrastructure. Some of you might also be impacted by this. Another issue to be aware of in our region is critical groundwater areas. Because of over-allocation of some groundwater rights in certain regions, and just the geology of the aquifers, how they were formed and how the access works to the water, And in some cases, even a lack of understanding and research around the actual quantity of available water in a given aquifer. The state has deemed some regions critical groundwater areas. And there are no new wells going in these areas. And there are a few near here that can impact the wine industry, in Yosemite Hills and a few spots on the Chehala Mountain. A scientist at OSU described part of the problem to me like this. We scientists know very little about groundwater. The groundwater models are really early. They're getting better, but it's not totally clear. I mean, we might say, yeah, there's an aquifer or there's groundwater, but it's not clear about the amount. And there's different impressions and attitudes about water. The Oregon Water Resources Department manager I spoke to really thought that water in Oregon was going to be a commodity, the most important commodity. Thinking about water as a commodity is a social perspective, and not everyone shares that perspective. And water is life, and should it be a commodity that can be bought, sold, and traded, like it is in a lot of the regions I studied in Australia? But questions around the value of water too. So as a water user, I don't necessarily want to pay for water, but it is weird that we don't pay for it. So one of the farmers. And then just the feelings around fear around scarcity. So it seems like everybody's getting scared, water rights are getting more difficult, or there's more regulation. Find it that it's difficult to get availability of information. So yeah, things getting more expensive, scarce. So these are the perceptions and attitudes are also going to be impacting how people are making decisions and behaviors. And this is really interesting to me, that the future of water transactions is going to be in transferring it. So you can currently, in certain cases, transfer water, but it could be an interesting future if that's the direction we go. Which really kind of brings me to my next point, which is, or just something to consider, is that I think it's important that we also ask questions about equity going forward as we think about water in our regions. So who gets to make decisions about water? Who's not at the decision-making table? Who can access the resources or not in the future? Like, is our system going to become really a pay-to-play? You have to have the economic resources to have this vital life source. Is our future water markets similar to stock markets? And then we have to consider that we're living within a time of compounding challenges. So water issues aren't isolated. They're within the context, of other economic, social, and environmental stressors. And then we're thinking about, when it comes to who can deal with these challenges, like what do we need to plan for a more water insecure future? Like, how do we increase our resilience? So I have a couple of case studies to share with you in brief. Just some folks that are doing some interesting things as they're considering water resources. So Tabula Rasa Farm, it's located in Carlton. Some of you might be familiar with it. They raise animals and grow vegetables and supply their restaurant, Humble Spirit, in McMinnville. And when the owner, Brenda Smolofoti, started the farm, she described her experience accessing water in an article in Modern Farmer magazine this way. I thought, it's raining here all the time, so there has to be water. She took the risk of drilling 4 wells on her acreage, spending 2 years and nearly $50,000 for it all to literally come up dry. She said, my intention was to have a farm on this piece of property, but without water, there is no life. So in 2016, Brenda partnered with a company called Elemental Ecosystems, I think they're out of Montana, and designed a groundwater recharge and water cycle restoration system on the farm. Using permaculture techniques, they planned a rainfall collecting landscape that would help hydrate the land for years to come. That included digging 22 ponds and swales across her several hundred acres, so the land could sustain itself without irrigation. And now the water is slowed down and held on the land and is able to percolate and recharge the groundwater, and her wells are active. Has anyone been to that farm? Oh, yes. I have not, but I'd like to. Okay. Chris, I'm looking at you, in case you want to add anything. Okay, my next case study is Silver Oak Wines. So they have vineyards and wineries in California and Oregon. Among other sustainability measures, they have instituted a comprehensive water conservation strategy, which has resulted in, according to them, 86% reduction in irrigation and a 26% reduction in indoor water use at their California facility. So in the vineyard, they're using precision viticulture technology to try to inform irrigation decision making, so only watering when they need to. In the winery, they've encouraged new social practices for water sustainability. So it's really about establishing a culture of conservation. So their California winemaker, Nate Weiss, described it this way: water should be right up there with health and safety and should be an all-year process. It's important to establish this mindset from day one. The winery has a dashboard system seen by all employees that monitors and displays daily water use and the ratio of recycled water to potable water used in the facility each day. So Nate said, we want people to know exactly how much they're using each day to track their performance and guide future operations. So they use squeegees to remove waste material from the floors instead of hosing things down. They steam sanitize barrels to save water. They use recycled water. And they've designed these easy access kind of hose stations so people can get to the recycled water easily. And then they use high pressure, low flow cleaning tools to wash things in their wash operations. And then they do some planning and scheduling. Their decision making around planning and scheduling at harvest does take water use into consideration too, where they're trying to pick and process grapes to maximize their daily crush and pressing to reduce the washing of the press between cycles for different types of grapes. Anything to add? All right, where's Letty? She can add into this if we need to. So my final case study to share with you is Jackson Family. And their efforts, they've instituted their Rooted for Good campaign to increase sustainability efforts at their properties both in Oregon and California. So their conservation efforts, they do capture rainwater from winery rooftops and store and reuse it. They also store winter rains in reservoirs, which I'm sure a number of you do here as well. And in California, they've partnered with researchers to flood vineyards in the winter to help recharge aquifers. They've done environmental restoration efforts, planting native plants in riparian areas near waterways, and they've also changed some of their farming practices to lessen impact to water bodies, like reducing tilling, reducing soil erosion and sedimentation. They also do real-time water metering in the cellar, use waterless UV tank sanitation technology, and reuse water in their barrel washing. According to them, they've been able to reduce their water use in that practice by 2/3. So I know that maybe some of those examples might come from companies who have resources to approach things like this, and you might think, well, what can I do? And maybe I can't invest in a UV tank sanitation technology right now or something like that. But I think there can still be inspirational stories, and I'd love to hear more from you throughout the day if you want to share what you're all up to. But thinking through kind of comprehensively, can you conduct a comprehensive water audit with real-time metering? So learn where you're using water and how much you're using. And that can have, I've noticed in multiple wineries who've done this, that they turn off the meter or they turn off the water and the meter's still running and they discover that they have a leak somewhere and they had no idea that it was there. So it can have like overlapping benefits. And then think about water reuse, like the reusing for washing barrels, and maybe make a water management comprehensive plan. So maybe you're going to be able to capture some rainwater from the roof or change some of your farming techniques, or reduce impervious surface on your property to help recharge the groundwater and hold it on site longer. Or consider these conservation methods of riparian plantings. And I do really like this, the thinking about kind of what is the culture of your operation and the practices and how does that tie into training of staff. So there's lots of ways to be engaged. Love to hear from you all if you have ideas of others, but of course live, staying engaged as you are today. Live has done an excellent job of helping collect data and have people, self-reporting about water use and just trying to understand the bigger picture of water in this region. And there's the Friends of Family Farmers, who I mentioned before, who are doing a lot of legislative advocacy. You're all probably associated with the Oregon Wine Growers Association. They have some good links on their website, specifically about some of the institutional stuff, so how you would go about engaging with the Oregon Water Resources Department, step-by-step type things. And they also have a water subcommittee that's working on policy objectives in Salem around this industry and water. Oh no, where's my, oh, there we go. And then I just learned about this summit that is coming up next week. It's not too late to get involved. It's called Sprout Summit. It's going to be happening next week, March 20th, on the Linfield campus. And it's a community partnership of government, nonprofits, and private businesses. And in their words, fostering collaboration across industries at the intersection of sustainability, innovation, and economic development. So I know it'll include themes around agriculture and water and economic development, among many other themes. If you have questions, you can take the QR code again, or I see Remy in the back. You can talk to Remy Drabkin or email her at her email address. And then the other thing, I just like to talk to your peers. I know you're all here to do that anyway, and you probably do already, but a lot of my work is really helping people in the agriculture industry foster peer networks, because you don't actually want to sit here listening to me talk to you for 45 minutes. Like, you're the experts, you're the ones trying, experimenting, sharing success stories, sharing failures. I mean, that's going to really make the difference here. So thanks. I'm happy to answer any questions. This is my contact information if you want to continue the conversation at any time. I am based in Oregon. I'm based up in Portland. So thanks for your time.
Let's give Erin a great round of applause here.